Hi all, welcome to Azure Data Factory session 18, and in this session we are going to take a look at execute pipeline. But before we move ahead, let me just go back to the last session and look at the set variable activity. So in the set variable activity, what we learned was that we can define variable like we define in any programming language, and you can give the values to the variable based on your requirement inside the pipeline. We saw how the parameters are different from variables in Azure Data Factory, and we saw one type of variable, okay, that is normal variables. And then there is another type that is known as pipeline return variable, okay. So let me go to my Azure Data Factory studio. Let me go to Azure portal. Today I was going to discuss that particular type, the pipeline return variable type. But before we jump on that, I think you should have the understanding of execute pipeline activity. That way it will be easier for you to understand what the pipeline return variable uh, is used for. So let me go to my data factory. Okay, so we were in the set variable demo pipeline. Okay, so in this case, if you see, you have settings here, you have pipeline variable and pipeline return value. Okay, so we will see the pipeline return value in our coming session. But before we jump onto pipeline return value, we have to see what is execute pipeline activity. So if you click on activities and search for execute pipeline, you will find out that there is an execute pipeline activity in the general section. Now there are certain things that you can't do in your Azure Data Factory pipeline, like you can do in your programming language. So for example, you cannot do nested for loop, you cannot do nested if else. So in that cases you have to use execute pipeline. Okay, we will see what is for loop and what is if else in the coming sessions of the Azure Data Factory. But let's just talk about the execute pipeline. Okay, so let me click on new pipeline and let's give it a name: pl execute pipeline demo. Okay, so here let me type the name execute pipeline. Okay, so the execute pipeline actually calls the other pipeline inside your current pipeline. So using this you can call the pipeline that you have in your pipelines in your execute pipeline so here let me just use variable demo pipeline. Okay, so most of the time what happens is that in order to understand this activity, like what it is actually going to do, you give the execute pipeline the name of the pipeline that it is going to call. So in this case I'm going to say it is going to call variable demo pipeline, set variable demo pipeline. Okay, so here now you have given the name, it is active, and let's go to settings. Okay, and it is asking for which pipeline you want to invoke. So it's like if you are using Python, so if you want to invoke a function inside a function, that is the kind of thing that you are doing here. So you are trying to invoke a pipeline inside a pipeline. Okay, so here what you have to do is you have to click on invoked pipeline and you will get the list. So right now we have two pipelines, so I am going to say pl set variable demo, this is what I want to invoke. Okay, and that's it. User properties you don't set, generally it is enough, and it is going to wait on completion. So it's like it's going to wait for this pipeline to get completed, and after that it is going to move ahead. Okay, so let me validate. Yep, everything looks good. Let me publish it. Fine, so now the publishing is complete. Now let me go back to my data factory resource group, go to containers, go to source, variable input, go to sync, variable output. Okay, so in this sync, I'm going to click on this. I'm going to say delete. Yes, variable output is deleted. Containers, I'm going to go into source variable input. Yes, everything is looking good. So now if you see, I'm not going to call this pipeline, that is pl set variable demo. Instead, I'm going to use execute pipeline, which will in turn call the pl set variable demo pipeline. Okay, so let me just click on trigger now. Click on OK. So the pipeline has started executing. Let me go in my execute pipeline activity. You see, it has actually started calling the pipeline. So this is the pipeline run ID. This is the pipeline name. So as you can see, the pipeline name is my set variable demo pipeline. I am going to click on the pipeline run ID. And if you see inside, it is actually running all those activities which I have set in my set variable demo pipeline. Okay. So let me refresh. Okay. The pipeline has successfully executed. Let me go back to my original pipeline, and yes, it has successfully executed here as well. Okay, let me go back to my containers. I'm going to click on to sync variable output. Here it is file1.txt and file2.txt. So if you check here, you are going to call execute pipeline activity, and it is going to create an pipeline execution for the called pipeline. So you see, this is the pipeline name, this is the pipeline run ID. Okay, so we are good here. So this was the main agenda for today's session. We saw execute pipeline activity. As of now, you see, it is a very like I would say a simple demo, but trust me, when you use execute pipeline, it can be a very powerful feature when you are developing pipelines in Azure Data Factory. By this, you can create multiple modules. So for example, I always try to give example from Python. So suppose if you write a big Python script, and that particular script is in one function. So you, let's say, write def, and you just code entire business logic into one big function. It can be a very difficult task to manage it, change it, and sometimes if it is going to throw you an error, it is not going to be very easy for you to debug. So in certain scenarios, what you do, it is always a best practice to break your entire logic into small pieces, where each piece is going to perform a certain set of tasks, and then those entire pieces will combine to perform the entire business logic. Okay, so this is how we do it. So in the ADF also, execute pipeline allows you to do the same thing. So suppose if you are building a pipeline which is very huge, and it involves multiple steps, so what you can do, in order to keep it simple, you can create small pipelines that are going to perform certain steps of that entire business logic, and then the master pipeline is going to call the execute pipeline activities, and inside those execute pipeline, you can call the actual pipelines that are going to perform those tasks for you. So that way it is easier for you to maintain also. And sometimes what will happen, that if you want to change something, you don't have to change the entire pipeline. Rather than, you just go into that pipeline that actually holds that logic, change that logic, and you are good to go. So that is how powerful execute pipeline can be if you use it, I would say, judiciously, where you use it in a certain scenarios. Like you should not overuse it also, but when you want to perform some code modulation, where you want to modularize your entire pipeline, execute pipeline can be a very nice option. Okay, so the purpose of this entire session was to bring you up to speed with the execute pipeline activity. Now we are going to go ahead and look into our pipeline return value, okay, in the next session. So thank you so much for joining me today, and let's meet in the next session.